Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive with us. You know the drill. You send us the source material, we break it down together, and you walk away feeling like a total CISA pro.
That's right. Today, we're taking on a set of CISA practice questions, really getting into those tricky concepts that might trip you up on exam day. But don't worry, we're not just going to give you the answers. We're going to dig deep into the why behind them.
So let's get right to it. Question 1 throws us right into disaster recovery planning, asking what needs to be addressed first for early recovery.
The key here is prioritizing processing based on business management input. And that's because disaster recovery isn't just about getting systems back online. It's about understanding which systems are absolutely essential for the business to function.
Okay, so my first instinct would be to try and get everything back up as quickly as possible. Why is that not always the best approach?
Well, think of it this way. What's more critical for a company? Their online store going down, or maybe their internal email system. One's clearly going to have a much bigger impact on revenue and customer satisfaction. Disaster recovery is about figuring out which systems are the lifeblood of the business and making sure those are restored first.
So it's about making strategic decisions under pressure, not just a mad dash to restore everything at once.
Absolutely. You got to think like a triage nurse in an emergency room focusing on the most critical patients first. And that's where the business impact analysis comes in. It helps you determine which systems are the most critical and need to be prioritized.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, question 2 shifts gears a bit, asking about what an IT department should have to support the organization's goals.
The answer is long and short-range plans, because IT can't just be about keeping the lights on. It needs to be a strategic partner, aligned with the business's goals and helping the organization achieve its long-term vision.
I like to think of it as having two different lenses, a close-up for those immediate tasks and a wide-angle lens for that bigger picture.
That's a great way to put it. So, for instance, if a company wants to, say, expand into new markets, the short-range IT plan might focus on upgrading their current customer relationship management system to handle more customers. But the long-range plan might involve developing a mobile app or even building a new data center to support that growth.
Okay, so it's all about having a roadmap for the IT department
Yeah.
and making sure it's in sync with the business. All right, question 3 brings us back to disaster recovery, focusing on an IS auditor who finds a critical application missing from the plan. It asks for the best recommendation, especially if the organization has limited resources.
In this situation, the best bet is a warm site, a good middle ground between those more expensive hot sites, which are ready to go at a moment's notice, and those bare bones cold sites, which can take a while to set up.
So it's like having a prepped meal kit versus having to start cooking from scratch.
Exactly. A warm site gives you some of the basic infrastructure, but it might take a little longer to spin things up compared to a fully equipped hot site. For organizations with limited resources, it's a balance between cost and speed.
I like that, the Goldilocks solution. Not too expensive, not too slow, just right. Okay, question 4 dives into backup solutions, particularly for sensitive data that has to be kept for a long time due to regulations.
The key here is media reliability. Long-term data retention isn't just about making backups. It's about making sure that the media you're using to store those backups can last.
It's like writing those crucial memories in invisible ink. It was there, but now it's gone. Poof.
Exactly. If you're dealing with data that needs to be accessible for years, maybe even decades, you need a backup media known for its durability and long archival life.
Okay, so you're not just thinking about how fast you can back up or restore, but how long those backups will actually hold up. Question 5 takes us to governance. It asks about the most alarming finding for an IS auditor reviewing an organization's governance model.
The big red flag is if senior management isn't regularly reviewing the organization's information security policy. That suggests there might be a lack of commitment and oversight coming from the top, which can be a huge risk.
But wouldn't it be a good sign if the policy was solid enough that it didn't need frequent changes?
Not necessarily. Think about it. The world of IT security changes so rapidly. New threats popping up all the time, regulations evolving, and of course, the organization itself is constantly changing. A security policy can quickly become outdated and ineffective.
So it needs to be a living document that adapts to the ever-changing landscape of risks and technology.
Precisely. Having senior management review that security policy regularly, it not only ensures the policy remains relevant, but it demonstrates that security is a top priority at every level of the organization.
Okay, question 6 shifts gears a bit, focusing on performance measurement. It asks about the primary goal of an IT performance measurement process.
The key word here is optimize performance. We're not measuring just for the sake of measuring. We're measuring to identify areas for improvement.
So it's not about gathering a bunch of data and then patting ourselves on the back.
Exactly. It's about using that data to make informed decisions, identify bottlenecks, streamline processes, and optimize those IT services to deliver maximum value to the business.
So it's like tracking your fitness progress. You're not just stepping on the scale every day to admire the numbers. You're using that data to adjust your diet and exercise to reach your fitness goals.
That's a perfect analogy.
All right, question 7 gets a bit more technical. It asks about the protocol an IS auditor should review to spot unauthorized mappings between IP addresses and MAC addresses.
The answer is the Address Resolution Protocol, or ARP. Think of ARP as a translator for your network. It helps computers find each other by converting those IP addresses that we humans use, like 192.168.1.1, into MAC addresses, which are unique hardware addresses for every device.
So it's like a phone book for the network. You look up someone's name, which is like the IP address, to find their phone number, which is like the MAC address.
Exactly. But now imagine if someone tampered with that phone book, adding fake entries. That's what attackers can do with ARP spoofing redirect traffic to malicious devices.
Yikes. So they could hijack your connection by making your computer think their device is the real deal.
Okay, I see why reviewing ARP configurations is important.
Absolutely. It can help you catch those sneaky attacks early on.
Okay, question 8 takes us back to the world of data analysis. It asks about the best way to find duplicate invoices lurking in a massive invoice master file.
In this situation, you want to turn to computer-assisted audit techniques, or CADs for short. These are powerful software tools that can sift through mountains of data way faster and more efficiently than a human auditor could ever hope to.
So instead of manually combing through those invoices, you can let the software do the heavy lifting.
Exactly. CADs can sort, filter, and compare data, which helps auditors spot those duplicate entries or missing invoices or any other red flags that might be hiding in that sea of data.
I'm sensing a theme here. It's all about working smarter, not harder. Absolutely. Now, question 9 dives into tax calculations. It asks about the best way to make sure a system is calculating taxes correctly. And this is especially crucial these days, given the complexity of tax codes all over the world.
Absolutely. The answer that stands out here is preparing simulated transactions for processing and comparing the results to predetermined results.
Yes, it's essentially a controlled experiment for your tax calculations.
So it's like giving the system a pop quiz with tax problems that you already know the answers to. And if it fails, well, you know something's off.
Precisely. By running these simulations, you can verify that the system is applying the correct tax rules and calculations across the board, which gives you a higher level of confidence than simply reviewing the code.
Okay, question 10 asks about something super crucial. Recognizing when something might be a security incident.
And this is where it's important to remember that security is everyone's responsibility. The answer here is that this recognition is required of all personnel.
It's like if you spot a fire, anybody should be able to recognize the signs and pull the alarm, not just the firefighters.
Exactly. So employees at every level need to be trained to spot potential incidents, whether it's an email that looks fishy or an attempted unauthorized access or just something that doesn't feel quite right. The faster you identify it, the faster you can contain it and minimize the damage.
Makes sense. So it's not just about having firewalls and antivirus software, but it's also about having those human eyes and ears on the ground.
Right.
All right, question 11 focuses on something that can be a major headache for any organization. Those pesky data processing errors that creep into our systems. It asks about the best way to catch those errors before they cause problems.
And the answer that really shines here is programmed edit checks. These are basically automated gatekeepers that you build into your systems. They scrutinize the data as it's entered, making sure it conforms to your specific criteria.
So it's like having a superpowered spell checker that catches not only typos, but also ensures the data actually makes sense in context. Like, if you accidentally entered a negative number for an order quantity, the system would flag it.
Exactly. These checks can verify data formats, ranges, and even run more complex validation rules, dramatically reducing the risk of those data gremlins slipping through.
Okay, so it's all about catching those errors early on before they snowball into bigger problems.
Cool.
Now, question 12 takes us to the portable data world and the importance of securing sensitive data on those little devices we all carry around. It specifically asks about protecting confidential company data on a USB drive.
And the most effective method is encrypting that data with a strong key. Encryption scrambles the data, making it unreadable without the decryption key, kind of like putting that sensitive information in a locked safe.
And even if someone manages to swipe the safe, they can't get to the contents without the combination.
Exactly. And USB drives, as you know, are notorious for getting lost or misplaced. Encryption makes that data useless to anyone who doesn't have the key.
Makes sense. I've lost count of how many flash drives I've misplaced over the years. Okay, so encryption a must-have for any portable data. Now, question 13 deals with a bit of a tricky situation. Those emergency changes that sometimes have to bypass the normal change control process.
It's a tricky situation, but even in those urgent situations, control is paramount. The best answer here is that management has pre-approved all emergency changes.
So it's like having an escape plan for your IT systems. You don't want to be scrambling to figure out an escape route while there's a fire raging.
Precisely. Pre-approval ensures that even urgent changes have been reviewed and authorized. It minimizes the risk of unintended consequences, maintaining that much-needed level of accountability even when things are hectic.
Okay, question 14 asks about the key approval you need when figuring out what system resources are available for your disaster recovery plan.
Executive management is the most crucial approval here. It's really about getting those folks at the top to understand and support disaster recovery, which ensures the plan has the necessary resources and backing to be effective.
Because ultimately, you need buy-in from the top to allocate those resources, make those tough decisions when a disaster strikes, and ultimately ensure business continuity.
Right.
All right, question 15 deals with continuous monitoring for capacity and performance. What should an auditor be primarily looking for when reviewing that continuous monitoring process?
The key here is ensuring the data collected enables timely planning for future capacity and performance needs. It's not just about reacting to problems as they arise, it's about being proactive.
So it's like having a crystal ball for your IT infrastructure, giving you the power to anticipate those bottlenecks and capacity issues before they become major problems.
Exactly. By analyzing the data gathered through continuous monitoring, you can identify trends, anticipate growth, and plan for those capacity upgrades or system optimizations before they become critical.
Okay, so it's about using that data to make informed decisions and stay ahead of the curve. Question 16 takes us into the world of EDI, electronic data interchange, and the importance of preventing those sneaky, unauthorized transactions. What should an IS auditor recommend to improve security in this environment?
Strong authentication is essential for EDI, so the answer is authentication techniques for sending and receiving messages.
Because when you're exchanging sensitive business documents electronically, you need to be absolutely sure that the right people are sending and receiving those messages. It's like having a secure courier service for your digital documents.
Exactly. And if those authentication techniques are weak, well, it opens the door to unauthorized access, data breaches, and even fraudulent transactions.
Makes sense. Okay, question 17 presents a scenario that's probably all too familiar to some of you. The IS auditor discovers unauthorized software installed on multiple PCs. What's the best course of action?
Communication and collaboration are key. The auditor should report the use of the unauthorized software and recommend steps to prevent it from happening again.
So it's not about pointing fingers or getting anyone in trouble, but rather working with management to address the underlying issue.
Precisely. It's about making recommendations, not playing the software police.
Okay, question 18 takes us into the healthcare industry, specifically a compliance audit of an online system that holds sensitive health information. What should the auditor review first?
Compliance is paramount in healthcare. The auditor should review the legal and regulatory requirements regarding data privacy first, ensuring that the system is designed and operating in accordance with those regulations.
So before you even start digging into the technical details, you got to understand the legal and regulatory landscape, the rules of the game, so to speak.
Exactly.
Okay, question 19 describes an IS auditor reviewing access to an application. They want to see if the last 10 new accounts created were properly authorized. What kind of testing is this?
This is a prime example of compliance testing, which focuses on ensuring controls are working as intended and aligning with established policies and procedures.
So it's like checking that the bouncer at the club is actually doing their job, checking IDs, and not just letting anyone in.
That's a great analogy. In this situation, the auditor is making sure the access control process is preventing unauthorized account creation.
Okay, question 20 presents a scenario where one person is handling both the developer and release coordinator roles due to resource constraints. It asks what the auditor should recommend to mitigate the risk.
When you can't fully separate those duties, you need to add extra layers of oversight. In this case, the auditor should recommend that management reviews the user's activities. It's like having a manager double-check the work, even though it's all being done by one person.
Makes sense. So even if you can't have that ideal separation of duties, you can still put other controls in place to manage the risk. Okay, question 21 asks about a factor that increases the risk of unauthorized system access through physical terminals within a company facility.
This one highlights physical security, and the answer is terminals with password protection located in insecure areas. It's a reminder that security isn't just about technology, it's about the physical environment as well.
It's like installing a high-tech security system but then leaving the spare key under the doormat.
Exactly. It defeats the purpose. If a terminal with password protection is left unattended in a public area or somewhere poorly lit, it's a sitting duck for shoulder surfing, unauthorized access, even theft.
Okay, so physical security and cybersecurity have to work hand in hand. Question 22 dives into patching and risk assessment. It describes a scenario where the IT department decides not to apply a new patch because they believe their other controls are good enough. What should the auditor recommend?
The answer that highlights a crucial principle of security is assess the overall risk and then decide. Patching shouldn't be automatic. You have to weigh the benefits against the potential risks. It's like deciding whether or not to take a new medication. You got to consider those potential side effects and determine whether the benefits outweigh the risks.
So sometimes those patches might address vulnerabilities that aren't relevant to your environment, or the patch itself might introduce new problems.
Right, and in those cases, the risks of applying the patch might outweigh the benefits. It's all about taking a risk-based approach and making those informed decisions.
All right, question 23 highlights a common security weakness: excessive privileges. It describes a scenario where all business users have the same access profile for a web-based purchase approval application.
In this case, the auditor should recommend that the organization develops additional profiles within the application to restrict user access based on their specific roles and responsibilities. It's all about the principle of least privilege.
So it's like giving every employee a master key to the whole building. Even someone who's only supposed to be in the mailroom could potentially wander into the CEO's office.
Exactly. By restricting access, you minimize the risk of unauthorized activities, data breaches, and even fraud.
Question 24 takes us into the world of virtualization. It asks about the biggest risk an IS auditor should be on the lookout for in an environment where admins can easily make copies of production servers.
The biggest concern here is that virtual server misconfigurations will be propagated across all those copies. Virtualization offers a lot of benefits, but it also amplifies the impact of mistakes.
So it's like making a bad photocopy and then hitting the copy button 100 times. You're just spreading that error far and wide.
That's a great way to visualize it. If a virtual server is misconfigured, those misconfigurations can replicate across multiple VMs, potentially creating a much larger attack surface.
That makes sense. So configuration management is super important in any IT environment, but in virtualized environments, it becomes even more critical.
You need to maintain that consistency and control over your configurations to prevent mishaps from spreading.
Okay, question 25 shifts our focus to outsourcing. What should be clearly defined in a contract for outsourcing IT facilities?
One of the most crucial things is ownership of intellectual property, especially when you're dealing with third-party providers. You want to make sure it's crystal clear who owns what in case things go south.
So it's like having a prenuptial agreement for your IT systems. You're outlining who gets what if things don't work out.
Exactly. And intellectual property rights can be complex. You need to clarify ownership and usage rights up front to prevent any disputes and ensure that your organization retains control over its critical assets.
All right, question 26 brings us back to disaster recovery. What's the most important thing for an auditor to check when they're conducting a disaster recovery audit?
The foundation of any good disaster recovery plan is backups. The auditor needs to make sure that media backups are being done regularly and that they're being stored off-site, safe and sound.
It's like having a spare tire for your car. You hope you never need to use it, but if you get a flat, you're really glad you have it.
Exactly. Regular backups are your lifeline in a disaster. They ensure you have a recent copy of your data that can be restored if your systems crash or if your data gets corrupted. It can even help you recover from a natural disaster.
All right, question 7 asks about the most important stakeholder to involve when you're putting together a business continuity plan.
This is where the process owners come in. They're the folks who understand the ins and outs of those critical business functions better than anyone.
It's like writing a recipe. You wouldn't ask a food critic to write a recipe, would you? You'd ask the chef who actually created the dish and knows all the steps involved.
Exactly. Process owners have the knowledge and the insight to identify critical processes, dependencies, recovery times, and alternative procedures. They're absolutely vital for creating a business continuity plan that's realistic and actually workable.
Question 28 describes those grumbles and complaints you often hear after implementing a new system. Business units are complaining that a newly implemented system isn't performing as expected. What should the auditor recommend?
Before you jump to conclusions, you got to get a baseline to understand what normal performance looks like. So the answer is to develop a performance baseline and monitor the system's usage to identify any deviations that might be causing problems.
It's like if you take your car to the mechanic because you think it's making a funny noise. The mechanic needs to know what a normal car sounds like before they can diagnose the problem, right?
Exactly. And that's what a baseline provides. It helps you identify those deviations and determine whether it's a real problem or just a case of users needing to adapt to a new system.
All right, question 29 asks, what's the most important step when implementing a new system on a really tight deadline?
You can't skimp on user acceptance testing, or UAT, even when time is short. It's the final stage of testing where real users get to kick the tires, so to speak, and ensure it meets their needs.
It's like the dress rehearsal before a big play opens.
Yeah.
It's your last chance to make sure all the pieces are working together and iron out any kinks before the big night.
Exactly. UAT gives you that crucial feedback to ensure that the system is usable, functional, and meets the business requirements.
Okay, and finally, question 30 focuses on securely moving an application from the testing environment to the live production environment.
The best way to maintain control and accountability during this process is to have the production control group handle the migration, copying the source code to the production libraries, and then compiling it. It's all about having that separation of duties.
It's like having a separate moving company handle your precious belongings when you're relocating. You wouldn't want the same folks who packed your boxes to also be the ones driving the truck. Too much risk of something getting lost or damaged along the way.
Exactly. The production control group acts as that gatekeeper, ensuring the deployment process is controlled, secure, and auditable.
Right, so we've tackled the first 30 questions, covering everything from disaster recovery and backup strategies to those essential security controls and governance principles.
Exactly. It's about making sure there's that clear separation of duties and controlling what goes into that live production environment. And speaking of control, question 31 throws us into the world of electronic funds transfer systems, or EFTs, where security is absolutely paramount. It asks which user profile should raise the biggest red flag for an IS auditor.
Ooh, EFT systems. Those definitely need tight security. What's the answer?
The one that should make you go, that's not right, is 3 users with the ability to not only capture and verify the messages of other users, but also send their own messages. That combination of powers creates a real recipe for potential fraud.
Whoa, yeah, I see why. It's like giving someone the keys to the bank vault, the security codes, and a getaway car all at once.
Precisely. Segregation of duties is essential in any financial system, but it's especially crucial in EFT systems, where you're talking about large sums of money being transferred electronically. You don't want that much power concentrated in the hands of just a few people.
Definitely not. Okay, question 32 takes us back to risk management. What's the most important thing to consider when you're reviewing an organization's risk management process?
It's all about making sure those IT risks are understood by everyone, not just the tech folks. So the answer is IT risk has to be presented in business terms. You got to translate those technical vulnerabilities and threats into something that business leaders can grasp and act on.
Right. Instead of talking about, say, zero-day exploits and cross-site scripting, you explain the potential impact on the business, things like financial loss, damage to the company's reputation, or legal liabilities.
Exactly. When IT risks are presented in a way that makes sense to business objectives, it's easier for management to get it, prioritize, and allocate resources accordingly.
Okay, question 33 describes a common problem. Newly hired employees sharing passwords, even though it's a clear violation of company policy. What's the most effective way to control this risky behavior?
Sometimes the best solution isn't just technical, it's about educating people. Security awareness training for users is the answer.
It's like teaching folks how to drive defensively. You can have all the airbags and anti-lock brakes in the world, but if the driver isn't aware of their surroundings, those safety features aren't as effective.
Exactly. Security awareness training needs to be a key part of the onboarding process for new employees. And it's good to have those refreshers down the line, to keep security top of mind for everyone.
All right, question 34 focuses on a crucial document, the information security policy. What's an essential element that should be included in this policy?
Think of the information security policy as the constitution for your IT systems. You're laying down the law, so to speak. So it needs to include the basis for access control authorization, the rules and criteria for who gets access to what information and under what circumstances.
So you're establishing the rules of the road when it comes to accessing sensitive information.
Right. It's about laying down the framework for how you're going to manage access control throughout the organization.
Okay, question 35 describes a control that's pretty common in the financial world. Branch managers having to approve transactions above a certain dollar amount. What type of control is this?
This is a classic preventive control designed to stop something bad from happening in the first place.
It's like having a lock on your door. It's there to prevent unauthorized access before it can happen.
Exactly. And by requiring those manager approvals for those big transactions, you're adding an extra layer of scrutiny, reducing the risk of unauthorized or fraudulent activity.
Okay, question 36 describes a storage area network, or SAN, that has all sorts of security measures in place. But there's one detail that should raise a red flag for the auditor.
The problem is that only one employee has access to this SAN, and that's a big no-no, especially for a critical system like a SAN. You gotta avoid those single points of failure.
It's like putting all your eggs in one basket. If something happens to that one person, well, you're in big trouble.
Right. You need that redundancy. You need separation of duties. If that one person is unavailable, or even worse, goes rogue or makes a mistake, that whole SAN could be compromised.
Makes sense. Okay, question 37 throws in the Capability Maturity Model, or CMM, which is a framework for assessing the maturity of an organization's software development process. What should an IS auditor be able to confirm when they're evaluating application development projects against the CMM?
The CMM emphasizes establishing standardized and repeatable processes. So the auditor should be able to verify that the project follows predictable software processes, moving away from that ad hoc, chaotic approach.
So it's like having a solid recipe for developing software, one that's been tried and tested, which helps ensure consistency and quality in the final product.
Exactly. A mature software development process, as defined by CMM, means fewer errors, more efficiency, and ultimately projects are delivered on time and within budget.
Okay, question 38 asks about the primary reason an IT steering committee reviews information systems.
The IT steering committee plays a crucial role in aligning IT with the business. So the answer is to ensure that IT processes align with and support the business requirements.
It's like having a board of directors for the IT department, making sure that IT is spending money wisely and actually contributing to the success of the business, not just chasing the latest shiny tech toys.
That's a great way to put it. The IT steering committee needs to be made up of folks from different parts of the business, which gives them that cross-functional perspective on IT decisions and priorities.
Okay, question 39 asks about a critical component of network management, and it's one we've touched on before, especially when talking about virtualization.
The answer is configuration management, and it's all about maintaining control and stability within your network by keeping track of your devices, their settings, and any changes that are made.
It's like having a detailed inventory for all your network equipment so you know exactly what's connected, how it's set up, and who made those changes.
Exactly. Configuration management helps prevent unauthorized changes, reduce errors, and it makes troubleshooting a lot easier.
All right, question 40 brings us back to that scenario of outsourcing production support to a service provider in another country, which raises some security concerns, particularly because their employees are connecting remotely over the internet. What's the most secure way to handle those connections?
A virtual private network, or VPN, tunnel provides that secure, encrypted connection over a public network, protecting the data in transit from those prying eyes.
It's like creating a private, secure pathway for your data to travel through the internet, even though it's surrounded by all sorts of potential threats.
Exactly. VPNs are crucial for protecting sensitive data when employees are working remotely or connecting from different locations.
All right, question 41 asks about the best way to enforce a policy that forbids users from visiting certain websites, like those social media time wasters.
You need a way to block those sites directly. So the answer is a web content filter. It's like a gatekeeper for your internet connection, making sure people are focusing on work-related stuff and not getting sidetracked.
It's like parental controls for the whole organization.
Yeah.
You can block certain websites, entire categories, even keywords, which gives organizations more control over their internet usage.
Exactly. It's about keeping people productive and, of course, preventing access to sites that might pose a security risk.
Okay, question 42 delves into compliance testing and how it benefits the IS auditor.
Compliance testing is about making sure those controls are actually doing what they're supposed to do. So the answer is it helps confirm that controls are operating as designed. It's like testing your smoke detector to ensure it goes off if there's smokes. You don't want to wait for a real fire to find out it's not working.
Right.
The auditor wants to see that the controls are actually mitigating the risk, that they're doing their job.
Okay, question 43 describes an auditor finding some IT policies that haven't been formally approved by management, even though people seem to be following them. What should the auditor do first?
The auditor should emphasize the importance of formal approval to management. Even if the policies are good and everyone's on board, without that official stamp of approval, it makes enforcement a lot trickier.
It's like having a set of house rules that everyone agrees on, but they're not written down anywhere. If someone new moves in, how are they supposed to know the rules?
Exactly. Formal approval gives those policies authority and legitimacy. It makes sure they align with the organization's goals and their overall risk appetite.
Okay, question 44 talks about a company that's already developed a formal business continuity plan and even conducted a tabletop exercise. What should the IS auditor recommend as the next step?
To make sure everyone's prepared for the real deal, the auditor should recommend a walkthrough test. This involves taking that tabletop exercise a step further, bringing in all the key players and running through those predefined scenarios.
So it's like a fire drill, but for your business operations. You're actually going through the motions and figuring out what to do in case of a real emergency.
Exactly. The walkthrough test gives everyone a chance to practice, to test their communication channels, and identify potential weak points in the plan before a disaster strikes.
Okay, question 45 deals with those pesky input errors that can lead to a whole cascade of problems further down the line. It asks about the best control for preventing output errors caused by those bad inputs.
You want to stop those errors right at the source. So the best recommendation is limit checks. These checks ensure data falls within those predefined ranges or meets specific criteria that you set.
It's like setting those boundaries for your data.
Yeah,
If someone tries to, say, enter a negative number for a quantity field, the system says, nope, not going to happen. Or if you enter a date that's in the future, the system throws a flag.
precisely. Limit checks help make sure the data is accurate and consistent from the get-go.
Okay, question 46 describes a data warehouse that's having some performance problems, specifically with slow query times at certain times of the day. What should the auditor investigate?
This points to potential resource bottlenecks. The auditor should look into those user spool and database limit controls.
It's like when everyone in the office tries to use the copier at the same time, things are going to bog down.
Exactly. You need those controls in place to manage resource allocation, especially with a system like a data warehouse that's designed to handle a lot of complex queries. You want to make sure that one person or one process isn't hogging all those resources and slowing everything down.
Okay, so making sure everyone plays nice in the data sandbox. Question 47 asks about the best way to detect unauthorized program changes.
The most efficient and reliable way is to use automated code comparison tools. They can compare different versions of a program and flag any discrepancies or changes that look suspicious.
So it's like having a superpowered version control system, except it's specifically looking for those unauthorized changes.
Exactly. These tools can be a lifesaver for auditors because trying to manually review code line by line, especially for large applications, can be incredibly time-consuming and prone to error.
Okay, question 48 asks about those often overlooked naming conventions for system resources. Why are they so important, especially when it comes to access control?
Having those clear, consistent naming conventions makes managing access control a lot simpler and more efficient. So the answer is they reduce the number of rules needed to properly protect those resources.
It's like organizing your files into folders on your computer.
Yeah.
You wouldn't just dump every document into one giant folder, right? You'd
Yeah.
create separate folders for different types of files, financial documents, personal stuff, work projects, and that makes it a lot easier to find what you need.
Exactly. Naming conventions bring order and clarity to your IT environment, making it easier to manage security and reduce the risk of human error.
Our question 49 takes us back to those emergency changes that we discussed earlier. What's the most likely reason for implementing one of these changes?
Emergency changes should only be implemented when there's a high probability of a significant impact on operations. It's a last resort, reserved for those situations where you absolutely have to take action quickly to prevent a major disruption.
It's like calling 911. You wouldn't call for a minor issue, you'd only call if it was a real emergency.
Exactly. And because these emergency changes bypass the usual checks and balances, they do carry a higher level of risk.
Okay, question 50 focuses on auditing access controls in a large financial system. What's the most reliable evidence to support this testing?
You always want to rely on the most objective and trustworthy evidence. In this case, the best evidence is a list of accounts and their access levels that's been directly generated by the system itself.
So it's like getting the official guest list from the bouncer at a club, as opposed to relying on someone's memory of who came in.
Exactly. System-generated evidence is generally more reliable than manually maintained records or those verbal confirmations. It just gives a higher level of assurance for the audit.
Okay, question 51 asks about verifying the authenticity of a sender in secure communications. Which method offers the most reliable authentication?
The best way to guarantee both authentication and integrity is through digital signatures. Think of a digital signature as a tamper-proof seal for your electronic documents. It verifies the sender's identity and ensures that the message hasn't been altered.
So it's like that handwritten signature on a paper document, but with extra security measures that make it almost impossible to forge.
Exactly. They're widely used in e-commerce, financial transactions, and other applications where trust and authenticity are crucial.
Okay, question 52 brings us back to disaster recovery and those tough decisions about acceptable downtime. What's essential to consider when determining how long it'll take to resume critical business processes after a major disruption?
It's a balancing act. You have to look at both sides of the coin: downtime costs and recovery costs.
It's like deciding whether to fix up your old car or just buy a new one. You weigh the cost of repairs against the cost of a replacement.
Exactly. Downtime costs include things like lost revenue, lost productivity, and the potential damage to your reputation. Recovery costs include the expenses of getting your systems and data back online, as well as any extra costs you incur while you're in recovery mode.
All right, question 53 asks what an auditor should look for when reviewing an organization's IT strategic planning process.
The key is to make sure that IT is aligned with the business's overall goals. So the answer is that the IT strategy should clearly articulate the IT mission and vision.
So it's like creating a mission statement for the IT department. It sets the direction, the guiding principles, and that long-term vision for how IT is going to support the business.
Precisely. The IT mission and vision should act as a roadmap for IT decision-making, resource allocation, and of course ensuring that IT is aligned with the business's overall strategy.
Okay, question 54 asks how integrating a business continuity plan into IT project management from the start can benefit business continuity.
By bringing business continuity into the picture early, you're able to create a more comprehensive set of requirements for that project.
So it's not just about focusing on those core functional requirements, but also about making sure the system can withstand disruptions and can recover quickly if something happens.
Exactly. By thinking about business continuity during the design phase, you can identify those potential vulnerabilities early on and build in redundancy, failover mechanisms, and those recovery procedures.
Okay, question 55 asks about the best way to make sure everyone's on the same page when it comes to data classification, making sure that sensitive information is protected appropriately.
You got to train people on the organizational policies and standards. That's the most effective way to help information owners classify data.
It's like teaching people how to sort their laundry. You have to explain the difference between those delicates and those heavy-duty items to prevent them from ruining their clothes.
Exactly. Data classification training should cover the different data categories, those criteria for classifying data, and the specific handling requirements for each category.
Okay, question 56 gives us a bit of a security nightmare scenario. A laptop with a file containing production database passwords has been stolen. What should the organization do first?
Damage control is key here. The first thing they need to do is change those database passwords.
It's like changing the locks on your house after you've lost your keys. You don't want someone finding those keys and waltzing right in.
Exactly. Change the passwords immediately to limit the damage, and then, of course, conduct a thorough investigation to determine the scope of the breach and any further steps that might be needed.
Okay, question 57 asks about the first step when reviewing an organization's software quality management process.
Before you can assess anything, you got to know what standards they're trying to meet. So the first step is to request all the standards that the organization has adopted for software development.
So it's like getting the rule book for the game, right? You need to know the rules before you could determine if the players are following them.
Exactly. The auditor needs to understand what the organization is aiming for in terms of quality before they can evaluate how effectively they're achieving those goals.
All right, question 58 gets to the core of what makes good IT governance. What's the most critical factor to consider when you're evaluating the effectiveness of an IT governance implementation?
IT governance isn't just about technology, it's about people. The answer here is determining stakeholder requirements and involvement.
It's like planning a party. You need to figure out who you're inviting, what they enjoy, and what their expectations are for the event. Otherwise, you might end up with a party that nobody enjoys.
Exactly. Getting those stakeholders involved is crucial for ensuring that the IT governance framework meets the needs of the business and has buy-in from the key decision makers.
Okay, question 59 focuses on backups, particularly for those critical online systems that can't afford any downtime. What's important to consider when providing backup and recovery for these systems?
You want to minimize data loss as much as possible. So the answer is ensuring periodic dumps of those transaction logs.
It's like keeping a detailed diary of everything that happens in your database. If you lose some of the main pages, you can still reconstruct what happened from those diary entries.
Exactly. Transaction log backups give you that ability to rewind the database to a specific point in time, minimizing data loss and allowing you to pick up right where you left off.
Okay, question 60 brings us back to disaster recovery. What's the most crucial thing to verify when reviewing an organization's disaster recovery plan?
A disaster recovery plan isn't a set it and forget it kind of document. So the answer is it needs to be regularly reviewed and updated. The world of technology changes so quickly, and you need to make sure the plan keeps pace with those changes.
It's like keeping your emergency contact list up to date. You don't want to be scrambling to find the right numbers when there's a real emergency.
Exactly. Those regular reviews and updates ensure that the plan stays relevant, effective, and aligned with the organization's current needs and priorities. It really is. A dusty old disaster recovery plan that hasn't been touched in years isn't going to do anyone any good.
All right, got to keep it fresh. Okay, question 61 describes a contingency test that didn't quite go according to plan. The recovery took longer than expected. What should the auditor recommend?
You need to understand what went wrong. So the answer is to conduct a thorough review of those recovery tasks.
So it's not just about throwing more resources at the problem or maybe switching to a different recovery facility. It's about analyzing what caused the delay and finding those bottlenecks.
Exactly. It could be certain tasks that are more time-consuming than anticipated, or maybe there are dependencies between those tasks that weren't properly accounted for in the plan. Once you understand those bottlenecks, you can develop targeted solutions to streamline the recovery process.
Okay, so it's a bit like analyzing a race car's performance. If the car isn't going as fast as it should, you don't just blindly slap a bigger engine in it. You analyze each component and the driver's technique to pinpoint those areas for improvement.
Great analogy.
Okay, question 62 asks about the most important factor to consider when evaluating an organization's IT strategy.
IT needs to be a strategic partner, not just a support function. So the key is to make sure that the IT strategy actually supports and enables the business objectives of the organization.
Right, so if the company's goal is, say, to improve customer satisfaction, the IT strategy might include things like improving the website's user experience, implementing a really robust customer relationship management system, or even using AI-powered chatbots for quicker, more personalized customer service.
Exactly. The IT strategy should lay out how IT is going to help the organization achieve its goals.
All right, question 63 is all about audit trails. What's the main reason for having those trails in place?
Audit trails are all about accountability. They help establish who did what, when, and where.
So if there's a suspicious transaction or an unauthorized change, you can follow those digital breadcrumbs to see who was responsible.
Exactly. It's like having a security camera recording for your data. Audit trails provide that evidence that can be used to investigate problems, demonstrate compliance with regulations, and even deter malicious activity.
All right, question 64 throws a bit of a curveball. It asks about a risk management practice that could actually expose an organization to greater compliance risk.
The answer is a bit counterintuitive. It's risk avoidance.
Wait, so trying to avoid all risk can actually be a bad thing?
Sometimes, yes, especially when it comes to compliance.
So if you're so scared of a data breach that you, say, unplug all your computers and store everything on paper, yeah, you've technically avoided the risk of a cyber attack. But you've probably also created a whole host of other problems, crippled your operations, made it impossible to do business efficiently, and possibly even violated some regulations in the process.
Exactly. Compliance isn't about eliminating all risk, it's about managing it to an acceptable level. Sometimes you need to accept a certain level of risk to achieve your business objectives.
Okay, so don't let fear paralyze you. Question 65 describes a situation where an auditor discovers a recurring software error during testing that's not being addressed. What should the auditor do?
Even small errors can become huge problems if they're ignored. So the auditor needs to recommend that problem resolution be escalated to get it fixed properly.
It's like spotting a crack in the foundation of your house. It might seem like a minor issue at first, but it could lead to much bigger structural problems down the road.
Exactly. The auditor's job is to make sure those issues are taken seriously and addressed appropriately.
All right, question 66 asks about a test to verify the accuracy of tape library inventory records.
The most reliable way is to get up and actually count. So the answer is a physical count of the tape inventory.
It's like counting the cash in a register. You don't just trust the numbers on the screen, you physically verify that the money is there.
Exactly. A physical count ensures those records are accurate and complete, that everything is accounted for.
Okay, question 67 focuses on a transition to a new system, specifically an ERP payroll system. What's the best way to ensure a smooth transition and make sure the users are happy with the new system?
The answer is parallel testing. It's all about running the old system and the new system side by side for a period of time, processing those real transactions in both, and making sure the results match up.
So it's like test driving a new car before you trade in your old one, making sure it handles your usual routes, that all the features work as expected, and that you're comfortable with the new car before you say goodbye to your old, reliable vehicle.
That's a great way to think about it. Parallel testing lets users get used to the new system, and it helps identify those issues or those discrepancies before you pull the plug on the old system.
Okay, question 68 takes us to biometrics and a potential vulnerability of this technology. What type of attack tries to use leftover biometric information to gain access?
The answer is a replay attack. This involves capturing that biometric data, say a fingerprint scan or a voice recording, and then replaying it to the system in an attempt to trick it into granting access.
So it's like recording someone saying their password and then playing that recording back to unlock the account.
Exactly. This highlights the importance of security measures like liveness detection and those tamper-proof sensors to protect biometric systems.
Okay, question 69 is all about those initial validation checks that are so crucial for preventing errors and fraud in credit card transactions. What's the first control that should be in place for an application that captures credit card information?
Before you do anything else, you got to make sure the credit card number is valid. So the answer is verifying the format of the number and then checking the database to see if that card is authorized.
So it's like checking the expiration date and the security code on the back of the card before you even try to run it through the system.
Exactly. That basic data validation can catch typos, and it can also flag potentially fraudulent transactions.
All right, question 70 asks a really fundamental question. What does management need to make sure of before they implement any controls?
Controls shouldn't be implemented just for the sake of having controls. They should be tied to a specific risk. So the answer is that the control needs to satisfy a requirement in addressing an identified risk.
Right, so you don't just go around installing security cameras and motion detectors all over your house just because you're worried about burglars. You think about what's most vulnerable, where those weak points are, and then you put controls in place to address those specific risks.
Exactly. A risk-based approach to controls ensures that those security investments are actually addressing the things that matter most.
Okay, question 71 takes us into databases and a concept known as referential integrity, which is all about making sure those relationships between different tables in a database are maintained correctly. What should the IS auditor review to make sure this is happening?
The auditor needs to look at the foreign key structure. Foreign keys are what you use to create those links between related records in those different tables, which ensures data consistency across the database.
So if you have a table of customers and a table of orders, a foreign key would connect each order to the correct customer, making sure you don't have any orders floating around that aren't linked to a customer.
Exactly. The auditor can confirm those relationships are properly defined and enforced, which helps prevent those data inconsistencies and errors.
Okay, question 72 asks about the main reason for including an audit module during the development of those online applications.
Those audit modules give you that real-time view of what's happening in your system. So the answer is to collect that evidence as those transactions are being processed.
It's like having a black box recorder for your software.
Yeah.
If something goes wrong, you can go back, analyze the data, and figure out exactly what happened.
Precisely. And because it's built right into the application, you can gather this evidence without disrupting those normal operations.
Okay, question 73 gets to the core of what makes a good audit. Why is it so important for an auditor to get enough solid audit evidence?
The evidence is the foundation for the audit opinion. So the answer is it provides that basis for drawing reasonable conclusions.
It's like gathering clues in a detective case. The more evidence you have, the stronger your case becomes, and the more confident you are in your conclusions.
Exactly. Sufficient and appropriate audit evidence allows the auditor to make informed judgments, whether they're looking at the effectiveness of controls, the accuracy of financial statements, or the compliance of those systems and processes.
Okay, question 74 asks how to dispose of sensitive data on a laptop that will be reused.
You need to make sure that data is really gone unrecoverable. So the best method is overwriting those hard drive sectors.
It's like shredding those sensitive documents multiple times just to be extra safe.
Exactly. Overwriting those sectors with random data multiple times makes it extremely difficult for someone to recover any of that original information.
Okay, question 75 describes an IS auditor looking over a feasibility study for a new data center. And there's one glaring omission.
They haven't looked at the big picture, how that data center will affect the whole organization. So the answer is the organizational impact hasn't been considered.
So it's not just about whether they can build the data center, it's about understanding how it will impact the organization as a whole, right? Thinking about operations, staffing, budget, even security.
Exactly. Building a new data center is a big undertaking. So the feasibility study has to take all of that into account. Things like location, power requirements, security, and potential disruptions during construction and transition.
All right, question 76 takes us back to software testing, comparing two different approaches to testing, bottom-up and top-down. What's the advantage of using a bottom-up approach?
Bottom-up testing helps you catch those pesky interface errors earlier in the development cycle. You're testing individual modules first, then integrating them into larger units.
It's like building a house, starting with a strong foundation and making sure each brick is laid correctly before moving on to the walls and the roof.
Exactly. Catching those errors early on can save you a lot of rework and headaches later.
Okay, question 77 asks a seemingly strange question. What's the main reason for having a policy that requires all employees to take a vacation?
Believe it or not, there's actually a really good security reason behind this. The answer is it helps identify potential errors or inconsistencies in business processes.
So it's like having a guest chef come in and work in your kitchen. They might notice things that you've become blind to over time, like a leaky faucet or a dull knife.
Exactly. When someone else takes over your responsibilities, they might spot irregularities or those fraudulent activities that have been hiding in plain sight.
All right, so mandatory vacations, good for the employees, and good for security. Question 78 asks about the biggest risk when you're implementing a new software package.
Version control is so crucial, so the answer is uncontrolled, multiple software versions floating around.
It's like trying to build a house using different sets of blueprints. You might end up with walls that don't line up, doors that don't fit, and a roof that leaks.
Exactly. Having those different versions of the software increases the chances of compatibility problems, security vulnerabilities, and support headaches. It's a recipe for chaos.
All right, question 79 asks about an essential element of a solid change management process.
Segregation of duties is a fundamental security principle, and it's crucial for change management. You need to make sure those critical tasks are handled by different people.
So you don't want the person who writes the checks to also be the one who reconciles the bank account.
Exactly. It's about reducing the risk of errors, fraud, and abuse. In the context of change management, this means having different people responsible for developing, testing, approving, and implementing those changes.
Okay, question 80 takes us into the retail world and those increasingly popular RFID tags. What's the biggest concern with a retail store using RFID tags to keep tabs on their products?
While they offer lots of benefits, RFID tags do raise some privacy concerns. The answer here is those potential issues of privacy.
So if someone buys a shirt with an RFID tag, the retailer could theoretically track that shirt's movements even after the customer leaves the store.
Exactly. That kind of tracking could be helpful for things like inventory management, but it also raises those questions about whether customers are aware of this tracking and whether they've consented to it.
Okay, so it's about striking that balance between the benefits of the technology and the potential impact on individual privacy. Question 81 asks about the best way to ensure you can recover your database if, say, a disaster takes out your whole data center.
You need a backup that's always up to date and ready to go, so the answer is real-time replication to a remote site. This creates a live mirror of your database at a different location, so if the primary site goes down, you can quickly switch over to the backup with minimal data loss.
So it's like having an understudy who's always ready to step on stage if the lead actor gets sick. The show must go on.
Exactly. Real-time replication helps minimize both data loss and recovery time, which allows you to get back up and running as quickly as possible.
Okay, question 82 asks about a resource that can help auditors assess how well an organization manages multiple projects.
The answer is the Project Portfolio Database. This is like a central hub for information about all ongoing projects, which gives auditors a comprehensive view of how projects are being managed.
So it's like a dashboard for all your projects, letting you see at a glance how things are progressing, whether projects are on track, if there are any budget overruns, or if any risks are popping up.
Exactly. That Project Portfolio Database gives the auditor that big picture view of the organization's project management capabilities.
All right, question 83 takes us back to software testing and that quest for finding bugs early on. What's the best way to quickly identify those interface errors that can happen when different parts of an application need to talk to each other?
As we discussed earlier, bottom-up testing is the best way to catch those interface errors early in the development process.
It's like checking that the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle fit together before you try to assemble the whole puzzle.
Right. You're testing those individual units first, then putting them together to make sure those connections are solid.
Okay, question 84 focuses on change management and making sure everyone's following those procedures. What's the most effective way to figure out if people are actually complying with the organization's change control process?
You got to look at the evidence. So the answer is to identify the changes that have been made and then verify that each one was properly approved.
So it's like auditing those expense reports. You check the receipts for all those purchases made with the company credit card to make sure everything was authorized and legitimate.
Exactly. By tracing those changes back to their source, you can make sure that the change control process is actually working.
All right, question 85 revisits outsourcing production support to a service provider overseas. What's the best way to ensure that only authorized employees from that service provider can access your network?
You want to add an extra layer of security. So the answer is two-factor authentication. This requires users to provide two different forms of identification, something they know, like a password, and something they have, like a physical token or a code from their smartphone.
It's like having both a lock and a key for your front door. Even if someone manages to pick the lock, they still need the key to get in.
Exactly. Two-factor authentication is essential for securing those remote access connections and making sure that only authorized users are getting in.
Okay, question 86 asks about a type of attack that's really tough to defend against because it targets human vulnerabilities rather than technical weaknesses. What's the best way to reduce the risk of those sneaky social engineering attacks?
The answer is security awareness training. It's all about educating your users, helping them understand the different social engineering tactics, and how to avoid falling victim to them.
So it's like teaching people how to spot a con artist. The more they know about the tricks, the less likely they are to be fooled.
Exactly. Training should cover those common tactics like phishing emails, phone scams, impersonation, and all those other sneaky techniques that attackers use to manipulate people.
Right. Question 87 deals with service level agreements, or SLAs, and making sure IT is delivering on its promises. What's the main reason for an IT manager to keep a close eye on technical capacity?
It all comes down to meeting those performance targets that are outlined in the SLA. So the answer is to ensure the SLA requirements are being met.
So if the SLA promises 99.9% uptime for a mission-critical application, the IT manager needs to be monitoring things like server capacity, network bandwidth, database performance, and all those other factors that could affect uptime.
Exactly. Monitoring capacity is essential for meeting those SLA targets, avoiding performance issues, and keeping those users happy.
Okay, question 88 asks about the purpose of having those stop or freeze points in the system development process.
Those stop or freeze points are all about controlling costs and keeping projects on track. The answer is they require any changes requested after a certain point to be evaluated for cost effectiveness.
So it's like setting a deadline for changes. After that deadline is passed, any further changes need to be carefully considered to make sure they're truly necessary and that the benefits outweigh the additional costs.
Exactly. Stop or freeze points help prevent what's called scope creep, where those projects keep expanding and expanding, often leading to delays and budget overruns.
All right, question 89 is all about network security and that outermost layer of defense. Where's the best place to install a network-based intrusion detection system, or IDS, to protect a company's website from attacks?
You want your IDS right on the front lines. So the answer is the demilitarized zone, or DMZ. This is that buffer zone between your internal network and the internet, where you typically place those publicly accessible servers and services.
It's like setting up a security checkpoint at the border between two countries. You're carefully inspecting everyone who's coming in and out to make sure there's nothing illegal or dangerous crossing the border.
That's a great analogy, and in this case, the IDS is that watchful guard, monitoring traffic for any signs of an intrusion.
Okay, question 90 describes a web application that's storing some pretty sensitive customer data on the web server even after the transaction is completed. What should raise a red flag for the IS auditor?
You never want to keep sensitive information around any longer than you absolutely need to. So the answer is it's a concern for the confidentiality of that customer data.
It's like leaving those valuables in your car parked on a busy street. Even if you're just running a quick errand, there's always a chance someone might break in and steal them.
Exactly. You got to protect that data.
All right, question 91 is all about digital certificates, those digital passports that we rely on for secure communication. What do we call the entity that's responsible for managing those digital certificates?
That trusted entity is called a certificate authority, or CA. It's like a passport office for the digital world. They verify identities and issue those digital certificates that we use to prove who we are online.
So you're saying they're like the gatekeepers of trust in the digital realm?
Precisely.
Okay, question 92 asks about documentation practices. Specifically, how long should the documentation for the business case for an IT development project be kept?
You want to keep that documentation around for future reference, for historical purposes, and even for accountability reasons. So the answer is keep it until the end of the system's life cycle.
So even after the system has been retired and decommissioned, you still hold on to those documents. It's like keeping the blueprints and the building permits for your house even after you've moved in.
Exactly. It's all about good documentation practices and making sure you have that audit trail, that history of the project.
Well, we made it. That was quite a journey through those CISA domains. I feel like we've covered so much ground today, everything from the nitty-gritty details of specific controls to those big picture concepts of governance, risk management, and security strategy.
It really has been a deep dive. We've explored everything from disaster recovery and business continuity to those tricky areas of application security, data management, and even emerging technologies like cloud computing and virtualization. Hopefully you've picked up some valuable insights that will help you on your journey toward CISA certification.
I know I have. I feel much more confident about tackling those exam questions now. And hey, even if you don't get every question right on the first try, just remember, it's a learning process. The most important thing is to understand the concepts and be able to apply them in real-world situations.
Absolutely. The CISA exam is tough, but with thorough preparation and a solid understanding of those key domains, you'll be well on your way to achieving that certification.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of IT audit and security. We'll catch you next time for another exciting exploration. Until then, happy studying.